Welcome to the presentation of the findings from the first Gravenhurst Against Poverty volunteer survey. My name is Brew, and I'm one of a 5-member team who were responsible for developing the survey during mid-2023. The main aim of the survey was to find out what is working well and to find areas for improvement to ensure volunteers' experiences at G.A.P are positive and rewarding. The survey went online for 3 weeks between the 24th of October and November the 14th, and it explored the views of volunteers with respect to 5 main themes. These 5 themes and their associated questions were generated in a variety of ways. The current focus of the steering committee was key, and we also provided an opportunity for volunteers generally to propose questions for inclusion. We sourced other volunteer surveys, and we also drew on the research team's professional backgrounds. For efficiency in tabulating diverse responses, many of the questions involved responding to a 5-point agreement scale, but there was also plenty of opportunity to provide written feedback for each section. Now, in order to infer generalisability from the results from those who did respond, we looked to signs of representativeness. For instance, based on G.A.P having around 160 active members at the end of 2023, we had a response rate of 43%. Altogether, these 68 respondents reported donating close to 1,400 hours per month to G.A.P. It represents close to 3/4 of the donated hours in total that G.A.P relies on to fulfil the services it provides in the community. We also heard from both seasonal and all year round volunteers, from volunteers across all 3 pillars, the food, wellness and transport, and from volunteers from across the full spectrum of length of time with G.A.P. And to illustrate this representativeness, not unexpectedly here, you can see that most respondents support the food pillar, but 20% are engaged in more than one. Just over a quarter of the respondents have been with G.A.P less than a year, and the large majority have several years' experience at G.A.P, including those who have been with the organisation from its inception. Now, this next slide is to highlight the skewed distribution of hours donated each month. So the horizontal axis is the hours donated and the vertical axis, the number of respondents. So for example, 22 donate between 1 to 5 hours per month. And the large majority, 84%, donate up to 25 hours per month. But then there's this large gap with the remaining 11 respondents who are providing close to 2/3 of the reported hours. So you can see we've got people giving 40 to 45, 56 to 60, and some people, there's about 7 people giving over 80 hours. So the administration of G.A.P is operating largely on a small workforce who provide many hours of service, but is maintaining its direct services into the community by drawing on the support of a much larger number of people. Now I'm going to be showing you a series of pie charts. The main colours to get used to for this section are the purple, which stands for strongly agree, and the green, I agree. So if you can get used to putting the purple and green together, that is telling you how many people answered affirmatively or yes to the question. So for both personal satisfaction and feeling appreciated, you can see a very powerful affirmative answer, over 90% agreeing or strongly agreeing. We asked volunteers what could be done to improve their experience in written form. And what we had come back was people looking to better understand how they're making a difference. a call for clearly defined roles and responsibilities of leads and individual board members, better communication between the moving parts, wanting more of a voice to be involved in decision making, time to get to know other volunteers and share ideas, more contact with general public through special events, less meetings, less sugary and processed food, a better database, getting our own space, and provision for more support for the wellness pillar. We wanted to know whether the initial training volunteers received was appropriate and found the large majority were in agreement. As you can see, the green and the purple, put those together on the left-hand side pie chart. But there is room for some improvement. You can see that there's about a quarter of the people are saying they're not sure or perhaps not. When we asked volunteers generally for questions to include, one of these was to explore the perceived value of a buddy system for new volunteers. And that seems to be an initiative worth considering. 2/3 agreeing, so the green and the purple. Being assigned an experienced buddy would then augment the initial training. A very strong voice of confidence came through in the team leaders, perceived to be providing appropriate support and direction, and also approachability with respect to dealing with any problems that arise. G.A.P is also generally perceived as innovative, the pie chart on the left, and around 40% would like formal time to share ideas in their teams that would provide, among other things, opportunities to share innovative ideas. So building on the perception that G.A.P is innovative, the large majority of volunteers experience G.A.P to have a learning culture, and nearly half would like to see there to be more opportunities. Given the large percentage of neutral responses here, though, suggests there is further potential to expand G.A.P in this way. So some ideas for learning opportunities. Here's a few comments that were given, just to give you a sense, a flavour of the comments. So balancing the need for me to give my hours to G.A.P with my need to learn more about G.A.P and its neighbours and the community. Maybe once per year have a learning event for us. Opportunities are needed perhaps for all volunteers to learn more about poverty, mental health, drug addiction, and their impacts on the individual and society as a whole. Bridges Out of Poverty was amazing, which is a program that is run with connection with G.A.P. And any refreshers or similar seminars would be great. And education and assistance navigating federal and provincial programs designed to assist those in need. The theme of learning continues. About half of the respondents are curious about G.A.P's organisational structure. So that's the green and the purple. And about a third of respondents would like an opportunity to share their skills and knowledge with those that G.A.P assists. So again, having a look at the green here, about 28% and 7.4% strongly agree. And some of those people also provided the sorts of skills and knowledge they'd like to share. That included conflict resolution, dealing with difficult people, promoting the objectives and ideals of G.A.P, been teaching the Excel and database management, financial planning, budgeting, taxation. Another could help with literacy, someone with art, another with cooking, and resume and cover letter writing and job interview skills. Now, differences of opinion in any organisation are expected and are at the heart of any innovative endeavour. However, unresolved conflict can be very detrimental to the good functioning of any organisation. From those who responded, unresolved conflict is not an issue for 70%. So in this case, see the blue and the red colours this time. So strongly disagree, and the red disagree as well. But it's important to note that there are 5% agreeing at some level over here, and around 25% which neutral, which might suggest there are some undercurrents. The suggestion from the research group to the board of directors was to designate an HR type person for volunteers to unpack problems with in confidence. With respect to safety, G.A.P is experienced as a safe place to work by the large majority. From the comments provided, we established where there are some issues. And they divided into two categories. One was at the church building, a concern about the boxes of food that are pretty heavy, and the church stairs can be trippy and risk of slipping, perhaps particularly in the winter. And working alone in the church can sometimes feel a little unsettling for those in the office. Out in the community, concern with secondhand smoke and angry-looking people, so not fond of some places that they have to go. And another garden person spoke to coming across some people who had been using some drugs, and it felt a little bit unnerving. So stories can assist us to better explore the experiences of the volunteers, and 29 people chose to provide some for us. Most of them were inspirational. With respect to location, we heard stories about the Tuesday and Thursday food programs, including from the drivers, those working in the G.A.P Garden program, the Coldest Night of the Year fundraiser, the farmers market, the community kitchen, Muskoka circles, and bridges out of poverty. Nearly half of the stories concern direct interaction with those that G.A.P assists, and about 30% concerned interactions with other volunteers. The remaining stories concerned interactions with the wider community about G.A.P. And some example stories followed. So for someone, the most rewarding part is the delivering to the neighbours with the genuine thank yous that they get each week. Having the kids run out when I arrive and ask if they can help deliver the boxes is very special. I find that when taking time to stop and chat with their neighbours, I'm just astounded by the struggles that so many of them have. Another person said when a neighbour calls or comes into the office to say they're doing better and that they no longer need G.A.P services, it's usually because they have found employment. And they often tell us how G.A.P saved them and how appreciative they are to have been helped. Another one said they loved the implementation of the sit-in option on Tuesdays for meals. I've been seeing the same people week after week and never really getting to know them. But after having the chance to sit down together, we became much closer and could catch up with each other every week. And I cherish those conversations. Example stories from interactions between volunteers. I enjoy organising and engaging my garden volunteers, planting, watering, problem solving, harvesting. Others are enjoying the sense of teamwork, the socialising, it's fun. Everyone looks forward to our time together. Another one was where they were able to share some insight into things they thought maybe needed to change, and they were nervous in doing so. But when they did share, they felt affirmed. And so they said that they got feedback saying what I was proposing was valid and that was very needed to hear. Another person spoke to everyone I meet during the volunteer shifts have been very cheerful and supportive. I remember one time when a volunteer was in need and when it was brought to a supervisor's attention, action support was provided. No questions asked, just immediate support. With respect to interactions with the wider community and with programs that G.A.P supports, the comments included the market. So they like getting there, gives them a chance to teach children about poverty and encourage them to be supportive of all of their neighbours. The opportunity to recruit more volunteers and get donations. People hear G.A.P being praised for what it's doing for the Gravenhurst community. The Bridges Out of Poverty workshop was worthwhile, and the Muskoka circles. Okay, now moving on to sections 3 and 5, aims and motivations and looking to the future. So what prompts people to become volunteers at G.A.P? Well, sense of civic duty, giving back, the most common response. Others said that they were nudged by other volunteers, so there's that recruitment coming through, wanting to share their skills and knowledge, and also to meet people, get out of the house, and some of them were new to the area. With any volunteer organisation, you need to keep an eye on volunteers' intentions with respect to sustainability. So we wanted to know whether volunteers had taken on too many hours, were their hours impacting their volunteer home life balance. And we did find there are some issues. 20% indicate they have taken on too many hours. That's the green and purple colours here on the left. And a similar number, 25%, report that in the future they are likely to reduce their hours. So here's the green and purple over here. We also asked how much longer they intend to volunteer. 10% indicate that they're intending to leave within a year, and 15% within 2 years. There's also a similar percentage down here who are unsure. And yet the large majority intend to continue to support G.A.P well into the future. Now, close to 3/4 of these volunteers also shared they were content with the number of hours they volunteer. So over here on the left-hand side. And 35% indicate they are willing to give more. And that's over here. I'm willing to do more volunteer hours. There was also strong evidence of a willingness to try other roles within the organisation. So nearly 50% of them either agreed or strongly agreed they were willing to do so if offered the opportunity. That's on the left-hand side here. And 11 volunteers stated that they're interested in job shadowing in a lead role to be a backup. There is also a substantial number of volunteers here who are neutral, perhaps unsure, and hence may also represent untapped potential for leadership positions if needed. The website and social media for communication with volunteers is working according to these respondents. Nearly 90% reported keeping up to date in that way. We also found that half of the respondents would welcome the opportunity for more socialising with fellow volunteers. So moving on to section 4, G.A.P and the wider community. Having an excellent reputation is key to any organisation and essential for G.A.P to continue to receive funding and donations. And in broad brush terms, you can see here nearly all of the respondents strongly agreed or agreed that G.A.P is well regarded in the community. No one disagreed with that statement. Given that food provision is the main pillar of G.A.P, it's perhaps not surprising that the respondents reported that G.A.P is perceived to be essentially a food bank in the wider community. But we did ask people whether they find themselves speaking about G.A.P when socialising outside in the wider community, and that is very much occurring. Less than 10% say they do not do that. That's the pie chart to the left of the screen. And interestingly, when asked to share what they talk about, it is the countering of the perception of G.A.P as only a food bank that is the most common topic shared. Second most common topic is to speak to the level of commitment of the volunteers and praise for G.A.P as an organisation. There's a sense of pride and a sense of belonging came through. They're belonging to something very worthwhile. Volunteers clearly recruit others to volunteer at G.A.P. Over half say they have done that. That's consistent with what's come up so far. Coming now to questions that really ask the volunteers to engage in thinking and writing about their ideas for where G.A.P might want to put its focus for the next 3 years. We had 34 comments provided. Before speaking to the specific areas shared, it's important to relay that essentially 3/4 propose an expansion of the current programs, along with an expansion of the volunteer base. The other 25% was spread across wanting to strengthen existing programs or maintain the status quo, or reduce services out of a concern for unsustainability and potential burnout. Focusing on the comments that involved an expansion of services with respect to the existing pillars, the food program was the most commonly mentioned area, 13 comments related to that, followed by the wellness program, 5, and then the transport pillar, 3. There was also a request to focus on education and learning, well represented, 12 comments, followed by the need to exert more political pressure on the town and other government sectors, that's 5. Other comments related to the housing crisis, 3, and the need to keep focused on expanding the funding sources, 2. So some comments follow to illustrate. For the food pillar, someone has suggested creating G.A.P hubs in outlying communities. Other suggestions include growing more food, make meals available daily, partnering with other organisations, and a focus on more healthy foods, including how to cook well. For the wellness pillar, mental health was a focus in the comments. For the transport pillar, advocate for better transportation in the outlying communities, perhaps a bike share operation and ride shares between local communities. And with regard to education, there were comments involving a focus on volunteer leads to expand their skills in management and dispute resolution, and then programs to support the independence of those that G.A.P assists. More pressure on the town, Gravenhurst, to release more funding for community programs, as well as encouraging the community generally to become more involved. The call for more political pressure continued in the comments on housing, with a suggestion for a tiny house community, and lastly, a suggestion to focus more on long-term donations. There was a similar question also asked, if we really want to have an impact on poverty, what G.A.P needs to do is, and 30 people responded to this question. Similar issues were raised here as well. The 30 comments have listed the areas most common in order of magnitude. The first one is advocate and collaborate. So collaborating with other organisations and with government agencies. Focus, of course, on accommodation because of the housing crisis. Continue focusing on funding, look to the wider community and other corporations for support. Continue to listen to neighbours and volunteers and the community needs. Encourage interpersonal relationships to improve connections. And there's the education piece as well coming through. One suggestion was to hold an open house to encourage the community to learn more about G.A.P, breaking down the myths about poverty. And I'm going to end. There was one other question that was asked. If G.A.P was a person, how would you describe this person to someone else? So here are some exemplar comments. What you can see is that these comments overwhelmingly describe the organisation to be very compassionate. Words like open-hearted, accepting, inclusive, nurturing, and generous are evident. For some, G.A.P is like a parent, someone who's there unconditionally for people in need, particularly for the really bad days. In ending, the data in this research offer clear evidence of G.A.P's valuable contribution and highly regarded position in its community. Aspirations for G.A.P to deepen its knowledge base and use its political power to radically transform the lives of people suggest an exciting future for this organisation. Thank you for listening.